The origin of fresco paintings is unclear, but the medium has been around for at least thousands of years. Some of the most famous paintings in the world have been created using this technique. But what exactly is a fresco painting? The painting of walls is one of the oldest forms of artistic expression, and the term fresco has been used as a generic term to describe those walls. The term fresco actually comes from the Italian word affresco, or fresh, referring to the use of freshly applied plaster, meaning that only works created in fresh or wet lime plaster are true fresco paintings. Still, there are three main types of fresco paintings. Buon, which is created in wet plaster and considered a true fresco. Secco, which is known as a dry fresco. And mezzo, or medium fresco, where the plaster is only slightly wet.
Still wet.
Many frescoes have not survived the centuries since they were created, but some of the earliest known date back as far as 2000 BCE, created by the Minoans from the island of Crete. Of these, the bull leaping fresco is the most well known, and has been the most completely restored. Other early frescoes have been found in Morocco and Egypt, with Egyptian artists preferring fresco seccos for their tombs. The medium has also been found in Greek, Etruscan, and Roman art, including ancient Pompeii and the catacombs of Rome. In India, frescoes have been found in the Ajanta caves that date between 600 and 200 BCE. And in Sri Lanka, the Sigiriya frescoes were created between 477 and 495 AD on the face of a rock, and have survived over 1,500 years exposed to the elements.
Welcome to the great outdoors!
Throughout history, the Buon fresco has been the most commonly used. Once an initial sketch is made and transferred to a surface, artists mix pigments with water and apply it to the wet lime plaster, creating a permanent bond with the wall. This durability is the reason it has been so widely used. The biggest challenge of the Buon fresco, though, is working within the time limit. A layer of plaster typically takes about 12 hours to dry. The artist can begin working about an hour after the plaster is applied, up until about 2 hours before it dries, leaving around 7 to 9 hours to complete a section. Once a section of plaster is dry, the pigments are bonded with the surface, and no more work can be done.
Enough for today.
These sections of plaster are called the giornata, which means a day's work, or the amount of work that can be completed in one day's time. On a large fresco work, there can be as many as 20 or more giornata. In contrast, the dry fresco secco technique uses pigments mixed with a binder that are applied to already dry plaster. The advantages of this technique over Buon is that it's faster, easier to correct, and a wider range of colors can be used. The main disadvantage is that works are less permanent. In addition to works created entirely with secco, secco can also be added to a finished Buon fresco in order to make any corrections or changes. During the Middle Ages, many important figures in art came out of Italy. In Florence, one of the most influential figures was artist Giotto di Bondone, whose work can be found in the Upper Church of San Francesco, the Church of Santa Croce, and the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, which is largely considered his greatest work. Giotto's work inspired many other Italian fresco artists that include Simone Martini, Ambrogio Lorenzetti, and Pietro Lorenzetti. Other important works from the Middle Ages came from artists in Russia of the Eastern Orthodox Church, the most well-known being from artists Theophanes the Greek, Andrei Rublev, and Dionysius. With the Italian Renaissance in the 1400s, artists began to have a better understanding of anatomy and started to use linear perspective, which had been lacking in earlier works. Early Renaissance artists included Masaccio, who took inspiration from Giotto, and sculptors like Donatello. Masaccio's most well-known works can be found in Florence, at the Santa Maria Novella, and the Brancacci Chapel at the Church of Santa Maria del Carmine. Mazzolino da Panicali created works at the Brancacci Chapel with Masaccio, and was another early adopter of linear perspective. Artist Fra Angelico worked in Florence at San Marco Church, and later painted chapels in the Vatican. A little later in the Renaissance, artist Binazzo Gozzole, a pupil of Fra Angelico, created works in Florence, Umbria, and Pisa. Filippino Lippi, the son of another artist, Filippo Lippi, continued work at the Brancacci Chapel in Florence. He would also do work at the Santa Maria Novella before going to Rome to work in the Carafa Chapel at the Basilica of St. Mary above Minerva Church. And Andrea Mantegna created frescoes in Padua, but his most well-known work is in the Palazzo Ducale of Mantua. Between 1481 and 1483, Pope Sixtus IV employed several artists to create frescoes for the walls of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City, including Pinturicchio, Pietro Perugino, Domenico Ghirlandaio, Luca Signorella, and Sandro Botticelli. The painting The Last Supper was created by Leonardo da Vinci between 1495 and 1498. The painting is not a fresco. Instead, Da Vinci used tempera paint on gesso to create one of his greatest and most well-known works. As a result, though, the painting has needed several restorations and remains in less than perfect condition. By contrast, the fresco The Crucifixion by artist Giovanni Donato da Manfrano sits directly across from the Last Supper in the Santa Maria della Grazia Church in Milan, Italy, and is still well preserved today. Da Vinci was not a fresco painter, but remains one of the main figures of the High Renaissance, along with artists Raphael and Michelangelo.
It's me.
The High Renaissance being the short period between around 1490 and 1525. Raphael, who was one of Pietro Perugino's pupils, created his first major works in the Apostolic Palace in Vatican City, created in what are now known as the Raphael Rooms. The works created for these rooms include the Parnassus, Disputation of the Holy Sacrament, and one of the greatest examples of High Renaissance art, the School of Athens. The same year that Raphael started on these works, Michelangelo started work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, which houses what are considered some of the most well-known fresco paintings on Earth. The works took 4 years to complete and are made up of 47 scenes containing 343 figures. The 9 scenes in the center are from the Book of Genesis and include 3 scenes about Noah, 3 scenes of Adam and Eve, and 3 scenes of the creation, including the creation of Adam, which is one of the most replicated religious paintings of all time.
Hey! Oh, stop booing. There's nothing wrong with it. There are dozens of us. Dozens!
Years later, Michelangelo returned to the Sistine Chapel to create The Last Judgment, which covers the altar wall of the chapel. The work took another 4 years to complete and consists of over 300 figures with Jesus and Mary at the center. One of the techniques used by Michelangelo and Raphael was to scrape an indentation into the plaster to further the illusion of depth. Michelangelo, in particular, always outlined his central figures to separate them from the background. Another artist of the High Renaissance was Correggio, who is most well known for the work Assumption of the Virgin, located in the Cathedral of Parma in Parma, Italy. Starting in the mid-1400s, oil paint became a popular medium, which allowed artists to work in layers and paint textures more naturally. Eventually, it became favored over frescoes and other paint mediums. Still, frescoes continued into the Mannerism period of the 16th century, with artists like Giulio Romano, Giorgio Vasari, Andrea del Sarto, and Pontormo. During the Baroque period of the 17th century, fresco artists included Annibale Carracci, Domenichino, Sebastiano Ricci, Guercino, Andrea Pazzo, and Pietro da Cortona. The last period to be associated with the classic fresco style was the Rococo period of the 18th century, Artists of this period include Giovanni Battista Gaoli and Giovanni Battista Tiepolo, who is the last artist considered to have worked in the style. In the 1920s, following the Mexican Revolution, a group of 3 Mexican artists started the Mexican mural movement. The group consisted of Diego Rivera, David Siqueiros, and Jose Clemente Orozco. Inspired by the classic frescoes of the Italian Renaissance, they used murals to spread their cultural identity and political message. Large public fresco paintings saw a revival, as they were the best way to make art that could be viewed by anyone. Later on, other artists joined the movement, and fresco work spread to the United States. In 1966, artist Suguhara Fujita painted religious-themed frescoes at the Chapel of Our Lady Queen of Peace in Reims, France, also known as Fujita Chapel. American artist David Novros created minimalist frescoes into the 1980s. Also in the 80s, artist James Hyde began creating fresco paintings using more unconventional materials. And more recently, artists Francesco Clemente, Daniel Boschkoff, Barbara Sullivan, Joyce Kosloff, Christopher Carroll, and Walter O'Neill have all taken inspiration from the frescoes of the past to create their own modern works. Frescoes are unique in that they are not only amazing works of art, but also a part of the architecture. In that way, they can also be fragile, since they are harder to protect in the event of a natural disaster. Still, these works continue to be created today. The lasting nature of the medium makes it possible to see works that were created centuries ago, still in their original locations.
Oh, it's still there.
These locations are historical landmarks and can give the viewer a glimpse into the past. So, what are your thoughts on this art form? Do you think the process and the works created are still relevant? Also, have you seen any of these frescoes in person? Any thoughts you have on this subject, please let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, please support this channel by liking and subscribing.